Okay, welcome back for round 2, where we continue to look at Dave Ramsey's 7 Baby Steps for Financial Peace. Last time we looked at the twofold model of how to create a positive cash flow by minimizing your expenses through a tough budget. One aspect of that could be using cash or even the envelope method. And now we get to the second step, which is you use the positive cash flow, the money that you have extra at the end of each pay period, and you use this to pay off all debt except for your house using the snowball principle, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we already talked about all of this, that debt creates a huge strain on the mind and limits our ability to focus. We can't make as good of decisions when we're stressed. And so all extra income after you've got the positive cash flow and the emergency fund should go to paying off debts. And Dave Ramsey argues that while the first step should take 1 to 2 months, the second step can take anywhere between 1 to 4 years depending on what you have. Most people, after they finish college, would have generally these loans, maybe also a credit card payment if they have credit card debt. So let's talk about the snowball principle, or the debt snowball. So essentially what you would do is you would list all of your debts from smallest to largest and put all extra income towards paying off the one with the smallest balance. Now, some argue that you should put the money towards the one with the highest interest rate, because that's the one that's increasing the highest every month. Now, Dave Ramsey argues that you should pay off the one with the smallest balance, mainly because of the psychological benefit. That if you remember from previous slides, I'll just go back to it real quickly, that your balance is falling just a little bit from the beginning. And so it's a good idea to use the debt snowball, because when you pay off the smallest debt, if you put all that extra money, it pays off a lot quicker. And then you use all that extra money and the minimum balance from the first debt to pay off the next ones. And I'll show you that in a second. And so the nice thing is that because you're paying off the smallest one, it has the smallest balance. So that means that the balance will go down faster. And so you'll see that reward, that positive reinforcement, and you'll be less likely to give up. Because remember, throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, you're going to be having all of these small opportunities to compromise, to choose immediate gratification over this budgeting. And this budgeting can yield results in the long term, but it's not very satisfying in the short term. And so this is a way to reinforce that, to help you build this skill, build this habit. Because people actually do give up on budgeting. They can get so stressed out that they don't want to deal with it. And then it just builds. And this is where you get to like collection agencies and all of that stuff, and people taking out payday loans, and it just gets bad. So I'll show you how to do it real quickly. So we saw this before, basically the same thing. So you have that $500 extra, and you have these debts, your car loan and your student loan, equaling $400 altogether. And you've got $500 extra for the month. And so these are rough estimates, but if you pay $100 a month on your car loan of $5,000, taken out at 4.5% interest over 5 years, and a $300 a month student loan, you're going to pay off this one first with the debt snowball. And so you add this 500 to the 100, paying $600 a month on the car. And so rather than it taking you 5 years, it takes you about 8.5 months. So you see that balance go down quite quickly, and you see the benefit. And that way you're able to keep allotting this $500 here, rather than just being like you only live once, like why not just have fun now? That's always going to be in the back of your mind. And so once you have that 8.5 months gone, then this is where it becomes the snowball. Like it slowly builds and builds and builds. You add the minimum, so you add the $100, $500, and the $300. So now you're paying $900 a month on your student loan, and so you're going to pay it most student loans are 10 years, you're going to pay it off in about 3 years rather than 10. And this is how his argument of it taking 1 to 4 years works, is that if you do this, you tend to build, because you're taking the minimum payment from the first one and adding it to the second one with this, that you end up paying things off much more quickly, and after you pay off one, the next one suddenly starts to accelerate even more. It's very satisfying. And so that's the debt snowball. Really key to use. Another thing to pay attention to in order to get a money sense, because that's one of the things I want you to come away with, is this rule of 72. And so if you take 72, divide it by the interest rate, so for instance, 8, this will give you the amount of years it will take for the money to double. So this would be 9, I believe. And so basically, if you have an interest rate of 8, it'll take 9 years to double. So that means if I had $5,000 in 9 years, I would then have $10,000. And so this is important to remember when investing and borrowing, because when you're borrowing, this rule of 72 is going against you. When you're investing, it's going for you. And this is why smaller payments and higher interest rates severely increase the amount that you're going to pay. That if you have smaller payments, that's going to be a longer amount of years, which gives the money more time to double. And a higher interest rate will also make the money go up much more quickly. And so you end up paying more in the long run if you have a small payment and a high interest rate. Or even a deferred payment. So like no money down and small monthly payments equals you pay us a lot more for what you get. And so here's a positive example of the rule of 72. So two people are the same age and retire at 70. One put in $5,500 into a mutual fund with 8% interest for 3 years. They did this every year for 3 years, from ages 22 to 24. And so if they just had inflation, that $6,500 would be $42,000. So that's how much we're comparing it to. And so then the other person put in $30,000 a year into basically the same kind of mutual fund, but only for the last 5 years. So they were 65 when they started. Like many people in America who get older with no real money in savings or retirement, this person seems to be doing pretty well off because they now have this money to put in, and they put it in for 5 years. So this person is putting in $150,000. Is that right? No. Yes, $150,000. And the other person's putting in $6,500, or the equivalent of $42,000. So this person's putting in at least 3 times as much. Who will have more money when they retire? Now, the answer, looking at the rule of 72, that there's a lot of time in between being 24 and 70. And so after 46 years, this is doubling a lot. So it's doubling every 9 years. This is doubling multiple times by the time they retire. And so this person's going to have way more money. And so this person will have about $569,000 when they retire. And this person will only have about $184,000 when they retire. Because this person, the second person's money, hasn't even had enough time to double at all. And remember, the first year, you're only collecting interest on the first $30,000. But this person has collected interest on this $16,500 over the course of 46 years. And so this person has many times more than the other. And so this is really important, because if you make really solid financial decisions when you're young, you will be set when you're older. Partially because of the way compound interest works and the rule of 72. Now let's look at a negative example. So this is really crucial because many of you will be taking these out and maybe haven't had them explained to you. We're going to be looking at student loans. And so if you have a student loan for $10,000 from your freshman year of college at 5% interest compounded yearly, one of the questions that people don't think about is what's happening to that $10,000 that you take out the first day of your college experience until the last day, or when you get a job and you start paying it off. And so this is where we get into the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. If a loan is subsidized, it means that the government or some institution is paying the interest while you're in college, or if you're in some sort of grace period. Whereas the unsubsidized loan does not. And so if you have an unsubsidized loan, it is increasing while you are enrolled. And so this $10,000 loan from your freshman year is accumulating interest while you're in college. And so this is really crucial because your balance at the end of the 4 years will be about $12,155. And so this means that, like if your payment is $130 a month, almost all the money will go to your interest until it's paid off. And so the beginning of the payment is really problematic because if you pay this for 1 year, your end balance at the end of that year will be $11,200. And so this can be really frustrating because, especially with student loans, especially with unsubsidized loans, is that you could pay for a whole year and not even be below your original balance. And this is why using the debt snowball and paying off your loans aggressively is really important, because this can be really frustrating. So, to end this look at the rule of 72 and how compound interest works, not everything you're looking at is going to double, especially if you have a loan that's less than 5 years. And so I want to give you just a really helpful formula to estimate total interest. So this will get you pretty close, and it's really fast. So you take the number of years, and you multiply it by the interest rate, and divide by 2. And that will give you a better look at how much interest you pay over the course of the loan. So if it's a 5-year loan and a 5% interest rate, divide that all by 2. Oh, doesn't fit on there. That will be 12.5% basically over the course of the loan. So at least double what the original interest rate was, and that will kind of help you see the way the real interest rate will work. This is definitely a formula I would commit to memory. It's pretty simple, and it will help you when you can just look at a loan and you can pretty much figure out how much interest you'd pay by the end of the loan. Okay. We're going to skip this for now. I'll explain a little bit more in the spreadsheet itself. And if you want to know, so the thing I just gave you was an estimate. If you want to know the real thing, it is this. And it's a lot more complicated. I did have students do it one semester, but there are a ton of possibilities for parentheses errors, and that's not really the point of what we're talking about. Okay, so let's go on to the third point of Dave Ramsey's 7 steps. So the first step was to minimize payments, minimize expenses, and to build an emergency fund. The second step was to pay off all debts except for the house. Now, as another part of Murphy's Law, Dave Ramsey recommends building a 3 to 6 months emergency fund, paying off all of your expenses for 3 to 6 months, and then saving to buy a place to live. And the reason is that, kind of with that Murphy's Law, if you have 6 months of expenses saved up, then losing a job, having something really bad happen, isn't going to be as financially catastrophic. That you'll have that extra 6 months to make a really good decision and to find a good job, or you'll be able to take off time to support a sick family member without having everything fall apart. And this is really his point here. And the reason he argues this before saving for retirement is that if something bad happens, retirement money takes extreme losses if you take it out early in an emergency. So it's better to have the emergency fund first and then save for retirement later. I definitely understand if people don't do it in that order, but Dave Ramsey is all about being debt-free and avoiding Murphy's Law and living very low stress. So a lot of the steps that you're going to need, this takes a lot of time. You're definitely going to need patience and practice of delayed gratification. Obviously, living simply, focusing only on what's most important will really help you with especially those first two steps. And then also recognize that this all doesn't work really quickly. You're going to want to have a spirit of grace and being able to celebrate small wins and appreciating the little things as you go into this. And then also, obviously this is about diligence. You've got to actually build the habits and do the work for it to actually happen. And the goal of all of this is to get to a point where you can be generous, where you can allow your money to work for and support others. And another thing is doing prudence, choosing the right methods to achieve a worthy goal. That using these methods can be really successful at achieving financial security, at becoming more generous in the future. Another thing that I didn't talk about is that people tend not to like to talk about money, and so having an accountability partner who's not your spouse could be really helpful, so that way you have another voice to make sure that you're keeping towards the discipline that you want to focus on regarding money. Okay, some last things. So when we look at everything we talked about, most of it is geared for people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I want to talk a little bit about how it can impact you at your season of life as a senior in high school, quickly becoming a freshman in college, or entering the working world. And so college, for most people, ends up being a debt that you will incur. And so we talk about, if it's all about being debt-free, there's something to think about. That going to community college, paying less, or even taking a gap year to learn the value of money and learn to look for skills can be really valuable. This is something not to just dismiss or think of as something lower or a bad option. Another thing to do is to avoid student loans as much as possible. Don't use them to furnish your apartment or for going out money. Some people will take out the maximum and just use that for whatever. And basically you should recognize that, one, it is illegal to do that, to not use it for tuition and things like that. And also, you're going to be paying a lot more for whatever you're buying at that time than it actually costs. And then also, when we think about things that don't last a really long time and that don't accumulate value, when you're thinking about rentals or car ownership, I generally recommend going with as cheap and reliable as you can get. We've talked about this earlier in this class, but if you learn to cook, it's much cheaper than eating out and much cheaper than eating in dining halls. Learning to cook will save you a lot of money. Another thing is that it's a good idea not to build the habit of using credit cards. There's a reason why credit card companies target 18-year-olds, is that if you develop the habit, then you're more likely to use it, and then you won't make those decisions to delay immediate gratification, and then you'll start paying those really high interest rates. And by the way, credit card company interest rates can be 20 to 35%, really high interest. And so when we look at credit card debt, it's really easy to stay out of it, but as soon as you're in it, it's really hard to get out of it because this starts all working against you. So here are some other last observations that are a little bit of an edit or a different path than what Dave Ramsey recommends. So he recommends saving and giving at the end and saving towards the middle, other than the emergency fund. And one thing that I think can be really good is just to begin saving and giving immediately in order to build the positive habits. And I recommend $50 to $100 a month to start. And the reason for this is that people with habits tend to be good at doing what they were doing before. And if you think like, I want to give when I have money and I'm secure and life is more simple, that may also be when you have a house and kids who want to go to college and a spouse and a vacation that you want to take because you have been budgeting so well for all these years and you now have enough money for the dream car. And so basically life doesn't tend to get less complicated financially, it tends to get more complicated. And so from that rationale, it's if we don't start a posture of giving and saving now, it can be harder to develop it later just magically. Another thing, and perhaps this is something you're taking from this, is like, it's a good idea to avoid debt in the first place. That way you can just skip the first two steps. Another thing, and people might be wondering this about credit score, is that credit score is a system that's used by creditors and those that give loans to assess your risk. And they can only assess your risk if you've owed money before and have a record of paying that. And so the more you have payments that you have to make, the more data they have to analyze about your risk. And so people tend to recommend that you keep a few small payments, like a gym membership or a car or a Netflix membership or something like that, to build your credit score. Keep it small, keep it few, so that way it's not the essential. I would do it through direct deposit and then just pay that off quickly. Another option, I do know someone that did this, rather than paying for an apartment during college, this guy just bought a trailer and found a place to put it and was able to save a ton of money by buying a trailer all at once before he went to college, rather than paying for rent in the dorms. Another thing, you can get a lot of really great furniture and kitchenware from thrift stores or Craigslist. Definitely would recommend. Also, one great way to save money is to live with your parents as long as you can stand it. Especially if it is rent-free, that's a good way. That's a thing that costs a lot of money, that it's great not to have that expense. And another thing, we talked about this a little bit, that if you start investing really young, it can be really beneficial and you can do a lot more than you could do if you're older. And so I want to talk about one option that's not generally associated with your job. And this is IRAs. So IRAs are individual retirement accounts. They are tax-sheltered retirement accounts that are usually mutual funds. And so mutual funds are a diversified collection of stocks that's professionally managed and funded by shareholders. So basically, a stock is a small percentage ownership of a company, and a mutual fund is kind of that classic don't put all your eggs in one basket strategies, where the professionally managed fund, they'll buy percentages, they'll buy stocks in a bunch of different companies, and all of that together is the mutual fund, and then you buy a slice of that fund. And so it means that your risk is minimized, but also your potential gains are minimized. So if one company in that stock goes up really high, you'll only get some of that because a very small amount of your money is actually in that specific stock. So less chance for huge gains, but also less chance of huge losses. And so a traditional IRA would be that the money you put into the IRA, into the mutual fund, is tax deductible when you put it in. So you don't need to pay taxes on the money you're putting into that. And a Roth IRA is kind of the opposite. So the money you withdraw when you retire, when the balance is much higher, is tax-free. And I tend to prefer the Roth IRA because when I think about that balance being way higher at the end, it's just kind of that psychological benefit that I'd rather pay just a little bit of taxes now and just have like all the money tax-free at the end than to not pay taxes now and then pay the taxes at the end. And this is not illegal. This is not some kind of loophole. This is set up by the government for middle-class families to be able to retire. And there is a yearly maximum. The yearly maximum actually has gone up once again. It is now $6,000. per year, and it's not applicable if you earn above a certain amount, although if you had time where you weren't earning that, doesn't mean that you lose everything. So this is definitely a really great option. Definitely would recommend that people max this out if you can, especially if you have no debt. $6,000 would be great as a goal for investing. Another issue, I just want to talk about these very briefly. When you think about investing, look through the documents to be aware of fees. Fees are where a lot of investing companies can really get you. And beware of the internal fees and the external fees. Really be aware of the internal fees. You're going to need to ask them about it, or even call up a different investment firm and ask them about the other one's internal fees. Because the thing about them being internal is they actually won't show up on the budget sheet. I think it's pretty sketchy, but this is something that does happen, and it's something to be aware of. So if the fees are really high, that's obviously going to diminish your amount of returns. And so one thing that people talk about, and I think is really valuable, is that when you're investing not directly for yourself, going through a fiduciary is a solid choice, mainly because a fiduciary is licensed with an ethical code to pursue the good of their consumers. And you might be wondering, like, well, why wouldn't they be? That in some investment firms, they might have an incentive to invest in things that support the good of that company, not only you. So basically, if someone's not a fiduciary, they could have a conflict of interest in where they're putting your money. Obviously, they won't just like steal your money, but they might not be pursuing something that's actually best for you. They may be pursuing something that supports the financial interest of the company instead. And so these are just two last things. I could go into a lot more detail with them, but they're just something to be aware of.